I request all the delegates to please be seated. We are ready to convene session 4 on decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors. Session is being chaired by Mr. Rajnath Ram, Advisor Niti Aayog, moderated by Mr. Ankit Hosing, Principal Octus Advisors. The other panelists are Ms. Neha Verma, IFS Director, Ministry of Steel, Mr. Mukesh Sharma, General Manager, Corporate Strategy, IOCL, Mr. Kaushal Kumar Banerjee, Chief General Manager, BD, HPCL, Mr. Mitesh Pandya, Chief Sustainability Officer, Aluminium Business, Vedanta Limited, Mr. K.V. Reddy, Senior Vice President and Head Corporate, Ultratech Cement, Ms. Millie Majumdar, MD, GBCINs and Senior VP, US GBC, Mr. Dinesh Batra, President, Thermal Hindustan Power Projects, Mr. Samrat Sen Gupta, Vice President, Business Development, EKI Energy Services Limited, Mr. Deepak Gupta, Senior Vice President, Carbon Credit Renew Power, Mr. Srini Viswanathan, CEO, Vibrant Energy. May I request all the speakers to please come onto the dais. Session being chaired by Mr. Rajnath Ram, Advisor and Niti Aayog, and moderated by Mr. Ankit Hosing, Principal Octus Advisor. Over to the panel.
Good morning, everyone. I would request Mr. Rajnath Ram to start the proceedings with his initial thoughts.
Very good morning to all the distinguished delegates, and I'm thankful to ASSOCHAM for inviting me here. The announcement made by Honorable Prime Minister during COP26 and the various initiatives taken by government with regard to the clean energy transition and achieving net zero by 2070. The initiative both on the supply side as well as on the demand side has a great importance. And we have a very distinguished delegates here, panelists, almost 11, very big. I think it's one of the largest I've been ever attending any session. So we know that there are various options already been tried out in the various sector. On the supply side, we have been putting up much efforts to increase the renewable energy penetration into the system. And similarly on the demand side, and there are various sectors which are very difficult to abate, but they also need to give in more push, how to decarbonize, what should be the strategies followed, and what would be the scale so that the commercial operations begin without having any further support from the government in form of incentive or tax incentive or any kind of things. So one is the creating enabling a structure, and at the same time encourage the industry for making large scale investment to the sector. So for that, it is very critical to have an enabling framework, And that's where the role of the government becomes important. So without much ado, I think we have to listen from our panelists here, and how you want to go, Mr. Sood?
Sure. So so we have a distinguished panel here with representation from most of the key industries which have significant carbon footprint and have been, having challenges resolving that. But I understand there is significant progress made on, each of the industries with respect to footprint reduction. What we will do is we'll, get initial thoughts from all of you, and then, go to the other guests here and see if they have any questions. So I'll first request Ms. Verma to share her thoughts on how the government is looking at the vision for decarbonization, specifically with respect to the steel sector. Thank you.
So thank you. So as you all know, India is sprinting on path of unprecedented growth. We have like hundreds of lakhs of crores of projects in pipeline, which will increase the steel demand to a very, very high level. And India's steel industry is one of the global leading players with capacity and production numbered at second position. So we have a responsibility towards our nation of catering to the increased demand. And as per our national policy, steel policy of 2017, we are slated to double our capacity from 154 million ton to 300 million ton by 2030. But as you all are also aware of the fact that India's steel industry is the second largest contributor to the carbon emissions in the country. We are contributing 12% to the net carbon emissions, and the global average is 8%. So keeping our Honorable Prime Minister's Glasgow commitment of 2070 net zero target in horizon, Indian steel sector is at a critical juncture, having a humongous task of decoupling its growth from the carbon emissions. Also, the steel plants, if you would be knowing, are long-lived, have long-term technology lock-in, and thus have a long emission inertia locking in. So it's really, really challenging how to decarbonize a sector which is so essential for India's economic growth, but is definitely a big contributor to carbon emissions. So that's why Ministry of Steel is now set to pull all the levers for accelerating this transition. We are currently working on a policy which is going to define the strategy, the roadmap, and the action plan for the decarbonization of steel sector, and is going to mandate incremental emission intensity reduction target the first milestone being 2030. You would also be aware, or may not be so, that India's steel sector is very unique in the world because of the varied diversity of processes, technology, and feedstock mix in steel making. We have blast furnace route, we have DRI electric arc furnace route, DRI induction furnace route, and so on. So with that kind of a challenge we have, and we also have a legacy capacity which is estimated to last till 2040. So with that kind of a challenging situation, we are now looking at the whole gamut of our decarbonization options, ranging from carbon minimization to carbon avoidance to carbon utilization, and are currently working in a framework of 5 pillars of energy efficiency, renewable energy transition, material efficiency, process transition, and deep decarbonization. Energy efficiency is the lowest hanging fruit. We are already, the steel industry, the steel plants have already adapted BATs, which we call them, which are best available technologies for reducing the energy consumption. And if we plan to penetrate 80% of energy efficient techniques into our steel plants, we would be able to reduce our emission by 10 to 15% by 2030. Renewable energy transition is also not difficult. It's again very, very achievable, provided we have a conducive policy atmosphere for being able to use renewable energy. We are also looking for increasing the scrap availability for steel industry because usage of scrap drastically reduces the emission intensity of the steel. And also the use of pellets and high-grade iron ore will also contribute to less emissions. Process transition is a little more challenging. As I just told that our 44% of our steel capacity is from blast furnace route, while 56 capacity comes from DRI, EF, or IF route. Pardon me if my language is a little too technical, but we need to understand how the processes mix is there. So, and out of this 56%, 70% of our steel making is dependent on thermal coal. And blast furnace route is also highly dependent on carbon feedstock. So it's definitely very, very challenging to lower our intake of carbon feedstock and move from carbon to hydrogen and electron as we are planning to increase blending of green hydrogen in our processes. Also, we are looking towards the world which is now going to 100% green hydrogen usage and electricity, renewable energy to produce net zero steel through DRI, electric arc furnace route, as we have an example of hybrid plant from Sweden. So there are a number of options, and of course CCUS is a very, very important element for our transition because we have a legacy capacity and brownfield expansion plans are also slated to come up. But the problem with the steel industry is that what we are talking about, these new technologies, there are some alternate technologies also over the horizon, like molten oxide electrolysis and all, they are yet to be matured at a level that they can be commercially adapted. Right now, nowhere in the world, any of these technologies are at a phase of commercial production. So what India is looking at right now, transition through renewable energy, energy efficiency, and material efficiencies, till these technologies mature, while we create our own enabling ecosystem of research, technology development, demonstration, and deployment, as well as bring in more finances for the capital-intensive steel industry. So this is what we are planning to do, and I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Neha. You have provided a very detailed roadmap how we are going to decarbonize the steel sector, although it's very, one of the challenging sector to decarbonize. But the route you mentioned that the other part of that 56%, which constitute DRI scrap base, those sectors are, I think, easily can go for decarbonization compared to the blast furnace, converting to DRI and then the other sector. So let me turn to the Mr. Mukesh Sharma, who is a general manager from Corporate Strategy, Indian Oil Corporation Limited, and followed by Mr. Kushal Kumar Banerjee, Chief General Manager, BD from HPCL. I think refineries also play a major role where I think there's a lot of potential to have the green hydrogen penetration in the refinery sector. So over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for...
Just one, I think let us make our comment very brief and short because we have a very large panel here and we have to also maintain the timeline. By 11:30, we have given the timeline to complete the entire discussion by 11:30. So I'll request each of us, I think, let us try to be very brief and...
Thank you very much. And we all aware that the refineries and petrochemicals are a major source of, they are mainly fossil fuel based industries, and they are driving definitely the energy of the nation, and without satisfying the energy needs of all the sectors, our nation cannot grow. And as you know that India is moving ahead to achieve this 5 trillion economy, then there is a huge demand of energy that needs to be satisfied. and where these all companies are taking part for satisfying the energy need, but there is a commitment to reduce emissions to basically to reduce the impact of climate change. That is a more responsible to all industry stakeholders. That's why our whole panel is collaborated together with the government. Indian Oil has taken several initiatives initiative to meet its carbon emission. Recently, we have announced our net zero targets. We will be going to achieve by year 2046, 1 year ahead of 100 years of independence of India. We have taken various steps. We have for collaboration. Recently, we have collaborated with NTPC for 650 megawatt of renewable energy, which will meet our growing demand for various expansion through renewable energy. We have also collaborated with Renew Power and L&T for converting our grey hydrogen to green hydrogen, where we'll put various electrolyzer plants across our various refineries. And we have to go pathway as will be detected by the green hydrogen policy, which is going to be soon launched by the ministry. We have done another MOUs with upstream companies, mainly ONGC and oil. Basically, the CCUS will definitely play a very vital role in meeting the energy transition, because we are considering all pathways, because all pathways has to come together to meet, because no single pathway will meet our targets for net zero emission. So we are putting up first project with ONGC where CO2 will be captured from Gujarat refinery. The capacity is around 0.7 million tons of CO2 capture annual capacity, and this will be used for two purposes: 0.5 million for CO2 UR application in Gandhar oil field that is located at around 100 kilometers from refinery. We will put a pipeline for transporting this captured CO2 and will be injecting in Gandhar oil field with ONGC. The feasibility study has already been completed, and now we are moving ahead for the second phase of the project. Another collaboration we have done with oil for our Northeast refinery. We have 3 refineries operating there, and we have a target to reduce our emission from these also. And where we are collaborating for EOR and other application, basically for food and beverage and chemicals and mineralization. We have recently also completed a feasibility study through ADB grants for putting up 2 carbon capture plant, one at Paradip refinery and another at Panipat refinery for 100 tons per day. The application is food and beverage industries. So there's several initiatives being definitely planned by a company to meet its target, and that is necessary to drive our business for future. Apart from that, last year we have completed around 2,180 LOI for CBG plants that is under Satat scheme, and we are able to generate from 16 CBG plant, and we are selling from 28 retail station, and we are able to sell around 4,000 metric tons of CBG. And CBG will play a vital role in energy mix, because this will not only reduce our import dependency on natural gas, but also it is a bio-based fuel, and that can be easily transported through the gas network. Despite there are challenges for transporting hydrogen in the gas network, CBG can easily be transported, and that can convert your whole network and whole industries to decarbonize. It is called as a low carbon gas. Apart from that, because all initiatives require a lot of funds, but many initiatives can be done without major investment. We are doing various optimization study to reduce the energy intensity, the energy which is used by various processes in refineries because they are using fossil fuel. We are increasing efficiencies of each process. This will reduce energy intensity and thus reduce your energy consumption and energy import for these refineries. So hope I am able to understand what energy Indian Oil is going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Mukesh Sharma. Now I'll turn to Kushal Kumar Banerjee.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Sir, whatever we talk about today is climate crisis and these issues. This basically, as per me, is not an environmental issue. It's primarily a result of only one factor, that is human greed. So there has to be a change in human mindset to take care of all these issues. We may give different names to these issues, but this is the primary reason. Now coming back to this climate crisis, keeping our commitment to 1.5 degree pre-industrial level when we talk about the Paris Agreement, right now itself we have crossed and we are 1.2 degree above Paris pre-industrial level agreement. So if we consider that, we have to remove around 1.8 billion CO2 equivalent every year for next 3 decades to keep that commitment. So you can understand the humongous task we have in front of us. And if you see the predictions and the primary energy demand of the next few years up till 2050, in spite of the best of accelerated climate energy transition scenario and all those issues and clean fuel, everything, best of renewable energy, still 2/5 of the world's primary energy in 2050 will be met by hydrocarbon. And that's a big amount, in fact, and you cannot do away with that. So keeping that in mind, the best and the most important way to take care of this climate issue is carbon avoidance and carbon removal. So keeping that in mind, every policy initiative is driven, and I personally feel that we have to work on 2 things when we talk about our green mother planet. One is commitment, other is collaboration. These issues cannot be handled individually by industries. We have to have a cluster-based approach where jointly, I can talk about few clusters around here where you can have a common storage point, you have shared infrastructures, and then work together to de-risk the investment, what is going to happen. And we can join hands together with the government, regulatory bodies, policy framework makers to come out with those issues. What are the incentives needed to go ahead with this infrastructure investments and all? That's going to play a big role in the coming years. In fact, recently HPC has taken a lead in working on CCUS in the Mumbai refinery zone, in fact, bringing together industries there, different class of industries like fertilizer, power plants, our own refineries. We are trying to work within a periphery of 5 to 20 kilometers there, which are the industries who have emissions, creating emissions. So we are jointly working together on feasibility of making a CCUS project there. Can we use that carbon captured for EOR or any other applications? So this sort of approach is going to help us. As a refinery, standalone, HPCL is taking huge lot of initiatives. We have clearly segregated our funds for green funding across the next few years. In fact, we have set our own specific renewable SBU working on that. We are very, very committedly working on flare reductions. Our entire air quality and flare is totally connected with the server of Central Pollution Control Board. It's being monitored every day. It's being done. Then fuel stack, flare stack is being monitored on a daily basis. Then we are going for renewable power. We are going for green power. In fact, we are also signing with NTPC on manufacturing of that. Green hydrogen, HPC is already going to commission the first plant in Vizag refinery in the month of December. CCU has already talked to you about that. So a lot of initiatives are being taken, especially is promoting CNG, CBG, we're putting up our own plant. Biofuel is being promoted in a big way. We already started 8% blending of ethanol to our fuels being marketed. So these issues are being handled, but I can always say, repeat again, that this has to have a very, very double C sort of approach, that is commitment as well as collaboration by all the industry members. Like if a cluster, if we talk about Eastern Belt, we can talk about coal mine and the steel cluster. If we can talk about Western Belt, like Gujarat, we can talk about chemical industry cluster. In Mumbai, refinery cluster. So this way we have to join hands together, bring down the risk, mitigate the risk, work together to work for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. I think very, very pertinent points about commitment, collaboration, the cluster-based approach, and all other aspects like the green hydrogen, renewable energy penetration, and these are the major activities already being undertaken by various industries. So now I'll turn to Mr. Mitesh Pandya, Chief Sustainability Officer, Aluminum Business Vedanta Group. Yeah.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here and giving me an opportunity to, being heard. I represent Vedanta and will be talking about aluminum business and how we are working upon, decarbonizing it. Starting with basically give you a global scenario. Aluminum production in the world is to the tune of about, say, 90 to 100 million ton on an annual basis. And out of this, if you look at around 70 million ton is being produced by primary route. Primary route means basically you take the bauxite, refine it to alumina, and then make aluminum out of it by means of smelter. Another 30% of aluminum is coming through the route of secondary, where you basically take whatever is the recycling taking place, you again remelt it and reutilize it. In fact, aluminum is called as a green metal because the energy required to remelt it and reutilize it and make it into the shape infinitely, I would say infinitely, is only 5% of the aluminum energy which goes into the primary smelting. And that's a route I think world is looking at. But then there are several challenging into it, because 70 to 75% of aluminum is still embedded into the world at this point of time. So whether you talk about building, whether you talk about electrical, whether you talk about mobility, all this aluminum is embedded and takes time to basically come out into the circulation. And that's where the challenge is all about. Finally, I believe there would be a war for the resources. And if you look at now how Europeans are already talking about that their aluminum or any resources will not go out of their country, right? So they're trying to put certain kind of thing. So we need a government policy, basically, how do we really look at our own resources? Primary aluminum is not going away anywhere. So even if you look at 2050, I think still whatever today we are producing about 70 million ton, 50 to 70 million ton of aluminum is still going to come from the primary route, because the secondary aluminum is still going to be embedded there. Now I'm coming to what is that, aluminum is all about. See, aluminum is the second metal, I think, the metal with the second highest emission intensity. So we are actually, after nickel, we are at somewhere around anything between, say, 17 to 21 ton per ton of aluminum. That is what is the intensity, what is required. And simply it is coming from the coal-based energy, because we require electrical energy to smelt the aluminum. And if I have to just put, the percentage of this emissions, then almost 87 to 88% of emission is coming from the coal-based power, which is a smelting operation. Remaining 10 to 12% is coming from basically a process emission, where carbon is getting converted in the reduction of alumina to aluminum and coming out as a carbon dioxide. And 0.5 to say around 0.7% is coming from fuel, what we are using from various processes, remelting and other kind of thing. So if you look at the route which is very amenable for us and very easy to go for is a renewable energy. And we as a Vedanta has already committed that by 2025, we will be having 10% GHG intensity reduction, by 30 about say 30% reduction, and 50 want to decarbonize it. And towards that, we have already committed 400 megawatt of renewable energy PPA we have already done. And by say 2030, we are talking about to the tune of 1500 to 2000 RTC renewable energy. But our goal is very high, because if you look at our own inbuilt captive power plant is to the tune of about 5 to 6 gigawatt of energy. Now, in the world scenario, if you look at it, about say, we are the largest aluminum producer in India, and second largest is Hindalco, and if you put together the capacity of the world aluminum, we are producing about 5 to 6%, okay? But again, if you look at that, India is a growing, and future transition is going to come from the aluminum, zinc, copper, cobalt. All these metals are very, very important for the green transition. So we see as a country a big opportunity for us. We are one of the largest producer of alumina, not alumina, I would say bauxite in the world. So I think we've got a huge opportunity. Government need to actually put our act together and see that how do we have a policies around towards integrated supply chain, where all our production and the raw material is coming from the area, so that we reduce huge amount of scope 3 emission. Scope 3 emission is again a huge, because we have to transport lot amount of emission from bauxite, whether it's a coal or whatsoever. 70% of our transportation energy is actually utilized in the scope 3 emission. So that's very, very important for us, that how do we reduce that. We are very much committed, how do we really move towards that renewable and green part of it. The second important thing is that, and towards it we require good amount of policy intervention, whether we talk about one grid, one nation policy, where the interstate transmission charges are actually reduced. How do we separate green grid or renewable grid available, where actually, this kind of industry are actually put on a green grid. The third very important thing is how do we really move towards the storage part of it. How do we relate the infrastructure which is integrated? So for example, today if you look at that, we don't have an integrated aluminum park. So we as a Vedanta are trying to put an integrated park where the molten aluminum will be directly used to produce the aluminum product out of that. So how do we really look at the supply chain starting from the raw material to the intermediate product manufacturing and the final products which can be directly sold to the market, everything into integrated park so that we reduce overall emission. The second part is the process part of it. The technology for reduction of aluminum is very selective. Today it is only based on the carbon reduction, but I think there are inert anode which is come, but the energy consumption of inert anode is pretty high. There are few companies that have actually commercialized the technology. By 2024, 2026, they will be come out. Rio Tinto and few other people are working on that. And we are looking at that by 2030, we will have a pilot in place or actually completed the pilot such that by say 2035, we will have all transitions started taking place, and say by 25, 37, we will be able to complete there on that area. So that will be able to reduce over 10 to 12% of emission what we are talking about. On the refinery side, which if you look at that, it is about 10% of total aluminum production if you talk about the life cycle cradle to gate kind of situation. There also we are working on few things. One is basically we are moving away from the oil and we are going to the gas to the calciner, which is about 30 to 35% of the entire energy. And then we are also looking at how we are working on that steam economy improvement, and at the same time say what we will say that thermal vapor compression system which is going to further improve the efficiency. So what I see that we have about 10 to 15% potential improvement in the energy efficiency in the entire sector, which I will be exhausting by 2030. We have a good amount of potential for about say moving to the renewable, which we are moving say by 30% by 2030. And then as the storage become more cheaper, I think we're going to accelerate that in future. And there we are also working upon the area, how do we reduce our, supply chain kind of, emissions by means of integrating our supply chain, putting the downstream aluminum parks, looking at our alumina coming from our operation where we are, our coal is coming from the operation where we are, so that the overall supply chain goes down. In overall, I believe it is a very important, juncture for us as a country to capture this market, because aluminum, zinc, copper, cobalt, all these are metal of future, and including the lithium. You know that the war is going on, who is going to capture the market? And it is important for us that we develop a policies and strategies such that we are actually in the front runner for us in the world to capture this entire economy going forward. So that's it from our side. We have a lot to share. If you have any further question, we'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pandya. In fact, a very interesting point raised. Already you are taking care of, the decarbonization pathways, 10% to your GHG reduction by 2030, then integrated supply chain, and also the concept of one grid and one nation policy. So now I'll be turning to Mr. K.V. Reddy. He's a joint president corporate of Ultratech Cement.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, sir. I am Dr. K.V. Reddy. I am representing cement industry here. All of you are aware cement is one of the most highest generation of CO2. The reasons and the roadmap which we have. First of all, let me congratulations to all of you, and thanks to the ASSOCHAM. We are on the day we are celebrating annual day, because last year CGGA has announced on the same day net zero carbon on 12th of October. So yesterday I received a detailed report on from CGGA which I am looking into. We are signatory to that. Most of the cement companies, major what I am telling is 7-8 companies which are contributing to Indian cement production, they're all signatory to do CGGA. So we are working towards that. We have 58 clear roadmap how to go ahead. Before coming to that, as you are aware, cement, we are the second largest in the world as far as production is concerned. We are 580 million ton capacity. We are going ahead with our further capacities, as you might be seeing in the newspapers, by adding 101 million ton. So which is the largest, and which is largest users commodity also, and which is cheapest commodity. Cheapest commodity which I can say is which is 7 to 8 rupees per kg of cement. When you talk about cost, when you normally we discuss about, but anything which we discuss about economy, we discuss about cost also on that, which is sold on cheapest rate, which is maximum used by commodity after water, what I could able to read some reports. As far as Ultratech is concerned, because we are the largest producers, having 120 million ton capacity as on date, further we are going to 150 million ton capacity in another few years. So it has become more and more responsible for us in India how we should make a carbon minimum emitted plants. We are already working on that. Let me say, there are major, if you'll see the manufacturing process, I will have to have some control of my process. There are 3-4 areas we have control as an industry. One is which is very difficult to abate, that's only we are discussing today, that is limestone. If you'll see the major portion of the raw material is required is only limestone, which is contributing to 1/3 of the total CO2 emission cement industry. There is no as on date alternative for that. We have some lab trials has been taken here and there and across the world, but they're at lab stage or a very small scale. Now time has come because looking to the requirement, it's a going country which we have, so there is a need to have a detailed studies on that to come up. So that's a major obstacle where we have 1/3 of the limestone. Still we are working on that, how to reduce our clinker factor by various other means. I will tell you, because our clinker factor goes to the even 70 to 80% when we talk about OPC cement earlier, which are manufacturing, which is 90% clinker factor we used to have. Only 2% used to use, and products, one of the major issue, different products which we are manufacturing as on date. With the help of various policy decision by the government and BIS, end of the day consumer, it's a consumer requirement. We are making different type of products where we are reduce our clinker factor up to even 60% of the clinker factor. That we are reducing our limestone consumption. And further we are working for various new products where we can further reduce our CO2 emission. Secondly is energy incentive. It's all energy requirement basis there where I have to put my energy into this. As on date, cement industry is working towards waste heat recovery. You might be knowing it. 2003, government has formulated some guidelines to go for waste heat recovery. They are not economical at that moment when you started it. Not economical, circular economy we talk about, it should be economical. Most of the cement plants are coming up waste heat recoveries. We have a good potential of waste heat recovery across cement industry. Even in my company, I am going for 35% of my total energy will be from renewable sources, that is waste heat recovery and solar. Most of the plants, wherever we have land, we are gone for solar power. So it's my company and most of, as I mentioned, 7-8 companies are there. We are already working on this. 30% of energy requirement will be met from the renewable energy in the cement industry. That's where we are working. As I mentioned, products, we are already going ahead. Further, we are working with the research organizations like NCBM so that we can develop new products where we require minimum clinker factor. So further, we can reduce that. And if we'll talk about, apart from energy, we are process. We are already using physiological process. We are using lot of technological upgradations so I can reduce my. Most of you might be aware and even when you talk about power, we used to have 120 units per ton of cement. Now it has come to almost 60 in most of the latest development plans. So any technology which is coming up, we are using it as on date. So that reduce our power and process. We have optimized our processes so that I can have a streamlined process where I should not have higher emissions on that. And one of the important measure for cement industry need to be where policy decisions has to be required. That is to be innovation. We are talking about carbon capture and use, CCU, when you're talking about. That used to be more economical. Otherwise, it is very difficult. Somebody has talked about an industry cluster base, which approach should be there. Wherein cement industry with respect to, we are an isolated area. Because if you see the distribution of cement industry, there are almost 7-8 states where 90% of the production. Because based on limestone, we are located there only. It is far away from the areas. Transportation is one of the biggest issue. And storage is one of the biggest issue where incentives or government policies need to be amended. As I mentioned, limestone is which are the major, I should not say major resource for the CO2 emission. That need to be done. As industries, we are working towards that. We have a clear-cut 50 years map to reduce zero carbon. And even when you talk about, we talk about concrete, because cement end of the day is a concrete, which is the development purpose is needed as a developing country. 50% of the waste we would like to use in the concrete, what is our plan. Already we have reached to the maximum level across the India. We have more than 150 concrete plants across. 50% unused and waste we are using to make concrete. That's where we are contributing to the reduction of our CO2 emissions in that. So we have a clear-cut plan to reduce. Already we have achieved to 27% of reduction as Ultratech I'm talking about. Mostly it may be figure. One of the issue when you talk about is fuels. Apart from energy, we are also using alternate fuels. Most of the people who are sitting on dais and in front, we know we are using different type of waste as fuel as well raw material. I'm using already replacing my raw material around 27% by making cement from various waste generated from different industries. And apart from that, I'm using fuel that maybe even I'm talking about fly ash when talk about material. Fuels, we are doing a lot of different type of fuels. Around 90 type of waste generated across India has been used in cement industry. My plan as on date, I'm replacing 4%. We have a plan to replace by 30% of fuels. If a policy comes up, because we are talking about use of MSW in cement kilns, there are clear-cut policies are leaking, funds are leaking with the municipal corporations. If you reach to 20-30% of my AFR alternate fuel resource, that will be very useful to reduction of carbon further. Thank you so much. We'll have further discussion on the same.
Thank you, Mr. Reddy. You are one of the largest producer of cement, and your capacity is going to increase almost 2.5 times. So it's a real challenge before you to how to decarbonize the sector. But already you have mentioned a lot of initiatives have been undertaken by your organization, and both through the waste heat recovery, the penetration of renewable energy, technological upgradation, and all. So let me turn to Ms. Millie Mazumdar, MD, GBCI, and Senior Vice President, US GBC.
Thank you very much, and thanks to ASSOCHAM for the opportunity. So far we have been, hearing from the different industries, which are some of the major contributors to carbon emissions. And if we are really, and interestingly, all of these materials culminate into one key product, which is building or infrastructure. So we need cement as one of the key contributors to constructing buildings or infrastructure. We need aluminum, we need steel. And cumulatively, I think all of these sectors will contribute to decarbonize the building sector. So that's the first point. But however, before I make my comment, I think it's very important for us to understand that there's a distinct difference between the products which go into making infrastructure and the final product that culminates into building an infrastructure, because that's getting used by people. When we are talking of buildings, like we are currently sitting in this hotel and so many lights and fans, air conditioning is on. We go from here, we'll go to our office, we'll go home, and there we'll switch on the systems that consume energy. So building decarbonization has a key, key impact people have a key impact on decarbonizing building. That first part is when we construct building, how we decarbonize, and then we operate building, how we decarbonize. So these are two distinct pathways. And here we distinguish, of course, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. And again, it's a very large and a complicated system that requires integrated approach. So let me just break it down into smaller pieces and give some insights on how we are trying to do it. For example, if you're talking about Scope 1 emission reduction, we know that the Government of India has the energy code in place for both residential as well as for commercial buildings in form of energy codes that is looking at reducing the operational carbon part of it. Then when we are talking about Scope 2 emissions, which is the energy that anyway goes to power the buildings, use of renewable energy, reduction of transmission losses, etc., all of them will help to decarbonize. Of course, in this entire discussion, I think we are missing out on the embodied carbon part of it. Most of the conversation around the building sector happens around the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We really do not look so much into the Scope 3 part and also the manufacturing of the products, materials that go into construction of this. So, and if we take these two together, then manufacturing, construction plus building sector takes about 22% of the emissions. So it's time that the ministries come together to look at a holistic view of the building sector, where we look at both embodied carbon reduction, and we have heard so many, initiatives that are taken by the industry to reduce embodied carbon. However, I think it's important that people are aware and we make choices while we are constructing buildings that we choose the low carbon cement. Unfortunately, again, in the marketing side of things, we do not see too many of these things. When we go to select a cement, maybe we base it on the lowest cost of it. So there is a large need for, again, bringing it out in the market, that what are the benefits of using low carbon cement that is getting, made by using waste products, which has circularity in it. So all of these have to come together. So that's one part of the conversation. The second is when we are looking at the urban planning perspective, the scope 3 part, how we commute to buildings, the entire EV infrastructure that is coming up, the urban planning, the commute, everything will contribute to decarbonization. And this, so this is the inanimate part of the building, that how you decarbonize building per se, but then we are occupying building. So if I ask all of you, when you go home, do you really care about switching off the lights? Do you really care about reducing the emissions from the air conditioner that is getting used? So buildings, and also there is a very important aspect, which is coming now, which is the social angle, which is the pollution angle, everything. Suppose we talk about very bad air quality in Delhi. So in order to keep ourselves protected, we need filtration systems, which consume energy. So on one hand, we are talking about decarbonizing, and on the other hand, we are using more and more energy to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves better. So decarbonizing the building sector is a much more, complicated issue, which requires an integrated approach from all these actors. And there are these larger issues that need to be solved if you're looking at really a true decarbonization pathway. So I'll take a pause here, and I think, we are in the right track, right direction, but there is much more need for generating awareness and people to contribute to this whole process of decarbonizing. And finally, just wanted to say that as an organization, we promote the LEED rating system globally. We are there in about 180 countries. And I am seeing it because we are a global operator for facilitating green building through the rating system at cities, communities, buildings level. There's a growing awareness around it and looking at integrated approaches for decarbonizing the sector by considering all these factors. And I'm very optimistic that we'll get there soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Majumdar. A very interesting thought about the building sector. And this also reminds me that, the lifestyle for environment, and that's one of the major initiatives announced by Honorable Prime Minister on the day of the Environment Day. So let me complete my left side. The one person left, Mr. Dinesh Batra, is the President, Thermal, Hindustan Power. Over to you, Mr. Batra.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you opened the session with remarks that maybe Niti Aayog needs to give some incentives. My personal view is, sir, more than the incentives, what everybody is looking forward to is an integrated policy framework today. Because the ground realities are shifting. If we look at the geopolitical scenario today, all of us have realized that doing away with conventional power, the way Germany and many other European countries have done, may not be the solution. Second reality that we must understand is that the battery storage is not coming too soon. Whatever reduction in prices or the innovation on the technology front that we were looking for has not happened. So that the first point I'm trying to convey is that integrated energy policy. So I remember in 2006, 2007, we had circulated a policy document for projections up to 2031, 32.
It was a 25 years future scenario building document. I was with NTPC at that time, and we used to prepare a 15-year corporate plan. So it was very useful. So I think that's the first comment that I want to make, that it's important that we all sit down together and we carve out a new policy document now. Besides looking at our commitments towards climate change and other things. So second thing that I want to convey is that while decarbonization is something good for all of us, that's what we have been talking about, we are working towards it. At the same time, we must not ignore the energy security and the energy independence part. Now, these are two dimensions which are not getting required focus from the policymakers today. So while we are drafting this integrated energy policy, I think these are two dimensions which we must also address, besides decarbonization. As an example to what I am saying, very recently I attended a conference on EVs. So as a country, we are going very aggressive on promoting EVs. Now the whole concept of EVs is based on two big advantages. So we say it's a cleaner way of transportation. Number two, we will not need to import oil and we save forex. However, we must understand that the premise while we started promoting EVs was that we are surplus on power. We are a power surplus nation. That's what is the premise on which we said, let's go ahead with very aggressive growth on the EVs. We are surplus on power and we are also surplus on domestic coal. However, being from the power sector for last 30 years plus, let me share with you that we are neither surplus on the power side, nor are we surplus on the domestic coal. That's what we have seen the ground reality just a few months back, when a state DISCOM was left with very difficult choice. Either he has to buy power at 20 rupees, or he has to go for power cuts. So that reality, and also if we have, since we have just listened to all the speakers here from different sectors, ma'am was saying that, in steel sector, we are looking at a huge growth. Similarly, in the cement side, on the aluminum side, looking at the growth of all these sectors, and looking at that we are actually having only 200 gigawatt of conventional power, which is 24/7. And with 70% PLF, which is the optimum level that I am talking of, we don't have more than 140 to 145 thermal power available. And the grid demand actually moves from 170 to 210. And it will keep on growing at whatever 6 to 8% growth is minimum that we can foresee. So these are some of the inputs I thought I'll share with you because it's important. We all succeed, or we all, we are all together into it. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batra. And a lot of policy-related questions. Let me answer a few of the questions you raised about the integrated energy policy. It was first announced in, I think, 2008. That is only the integrated energy policy as far as India is concerned. The second policy was attempted in 2017. I think it went for interministerial consultation. It was hosted on the public website, and then we also received comments from the various organization, but I think there was then some shift in the government policy, and there at that time it was decided to let us have a 15-year strategy, vision, and those kind of things. Now government is again going for preparing this Vision 2047, and their sectoral group of secretaries have been set up. So they are preparing a vision for the country, including our commitment for 2030, and what would be the roadmap till 2047. So energy is one of them. So we are working very closely with this sectoral group of secretaries also. We are providing input to them. And Niti Aayog is in the process of compiling the entire vision for the country. So that's one aspect. And you also raised a very pertinent question about the energy security. And although we have the around more than 405 gigawatt of installed capacity within the country, but in spite of that, we are unable to meet our peak demand. And recently we have faced that music. So that's some problem within the, I think, various regulations and the policy. I mean, I admit that, but we are also trying to resolve some of the issues. So let me now move on the right side over to Mr. Shamrat Sen Gupta, Vice President, EKI Energy Services Limited. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. I represent EKI Energy Service, which is, if not the largest, one of the largest player in the carbon market in the world. And sitting with various industry stalwarts, particularly the industry represented, are hard to abate sector. And we have learned about the initiatives taken at steel, cement, aluminum, and other such kind of carbon-intensive sector. But all this initiative under this capitalistic economic model we required a finance support to make industry go for this initiative where it will address to their bottom line. And possibly in the history of mankind, from the advent of this industrial revolution in 1850s onwards, this is the first time the environment is getting reflected into the balance sheet and the investment analysis of businesses through the channel of carbon market, carbon risk assessment, carbon valuation, and carbon revenue. And all these initiatives, we are talking about integrated energy policies, integrated approach for a better secured and future India. We also should look about that the present carbon market, most of the operational models are based on not addressing the cradle to gate aspects of the low-hanging fruit of resource optimization, the scrap, reuse, utilization of the scrap. It is not really getting into the carbon market, and the industry is not getting benefit out of it. There are other aspects of hydrogen that upstream supply chain has been talked about. Still, there is no existence of that kind of initiative getting carbon or low carbon, the green finance to go ahead with it. Similarly, the oil and gas sector, particularly on the upstream, the methane-related abatement process, which though India is not a party as a country, but there are a lot of initiatives the industry may take on. We need to, we as a service provider to the industry are very keen to hold hand to provide those kind of methodologies and processes to be built inside that, so that all this initiative from the industry sides get reflected in their bottom line. That will help the process in this model sustainable, beside the philanthropic approach of R&D and issues with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sengupta. Now I'll turn to my friend Deepak Gupta.
Thank you, Rajnath-ji, and thank you, ASSOCHAM, for providing me an opportunity to be here. I'm sorry, but I'm a bit of an outlier on this panel. We are the largest renewable energy company in India, and incidentally and thankfully, we do not generate much of carbon. So I can compare it from the other side of the table. So just in terms of, we are actually not just a renewable energy company anymore at Renew. We are actually a full spectrum solution provider for decarbonization needs of corporate sector. And I'm sure most of you know it, but still I'm saying it. So more than 5,000 large companies have already globally committed and being a part of Race to Zero coalition. And between those 5,000 companies, they represent something like 25% of global carbon emissions. If they want to become net zero, that means industrial commitments themselves will result in, and at least history suggests that industries, once they have committed to something, mostly they have been able to achieve those outcomes. So that itself will result in reduction in 25% global emissions. Timelines are different, obviously. Some are by 2040, 45, 50, and thereabouts. Now on the same side, 137 countries have committed to be net zero in different forms and shapes and platforms by different timeframes again. And between these 137 countries, they represent 80% of global carbon emissions. So now if we look at these numbers, that means the problem is going to get resolved, but the challenge is how. Now in that spectrum, as I said, in a full spectrum services, renewable energy is certainly going to play an important role, which is what we are already seeing. At Renew, we generate almost close to 2% of India's electricity, which is all from renewable energy sources only. And we have, just now my IOCL friend also shared with you, we have tied up with IOCL to help them convert their gray hydrogen to green hydrogen facilities. We are making interventions in green ammonia space as well. Despite all of this, what we have seen, not just in India, but even in Europe and US, companies struggle in getting to net zero. So one of the key additional interventions they are looking at is how can they buy something called offsets or carbon offsets. Now that's where a lot of new things are shaping up, I would say, and high quality, high integrity carbon offsets. One good thing with carbon is carbon reduced anywhere in the globe has actually same value as far as the carbon crisis is concerned. And to that extent, I think one key message for this group and my fellow panelists is how can India actually position itself as a global carbon or decarbonization services provider is something we should seriously think about and we should seriously focus on. That will not just help our own hard to abate industry, which is what we are talking about. And for example, some of my friends on the panel said that it will take some years for battery storage to shape up. It will take some years for green hydrogen to shape up. I don't think that means that we cannot work together to achieve decarbonization any faster. It only means that we have to look for innovative ways. And such innovative ways are already, in some sense, globally accepted, initiated at CDM and UNFCCC level almost 15, 20 years back. Now there are voluntary frameworks available. So growing trees, I mean, it's as simple as that, is one very good way to decarbonize. And again, I'm not saying let that be the ultimate solution. I'm only saying let there be transitions. If we cannot convert to green hydrogen tomorrow, maybe let's go for offsets generated through what is called nature-based solutions or growing trees or ensuring that our nature helps us decarbonize. How do we fast track such interventions, not just in India, but also globally, and have global acceptance of such interventions? And this is a huge business opportunity for India as well, wherein we can actually fast track greening of India's economy and potentially a large part of cost can actually be borne by our foreign counterparts, our foreign businesses, who are very keen to buy high quality offsets, who are very keen to support transition of other countries, because in their own country it is either very costly or it is not possible because of either land restrictions or several other restrictions. So second message, so first message, just at the cost of repetition, is how do we work together to ensure that India evolves as a global hub for decarbonization services provider, and actually investment flows to India, and India also earns handsome foreign exchange in lieu of that. Second key message is even on the technological front, and again, my friends on the panel talked about carbon capture, storage interventions. Again, how do we scale that up? Some of you might have heard about IRA in US, Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is now suggesting incentives to the tune of $180, $190 per ton of CO2 storage. That's huge. So again, as a country, as corporates, as government, how do we come together to incentivize such interventions? And my belief, I'm not talking with data, but my belief based on how our renewable energy story has been, how our other stories have been, we can potentially do carbon sequestration, carbon storage through technology in India at a much, much lower cost. We may not need $180, $190 kind of subsidy. But yes, certainly what is required is for government to come up with policies and frameworks to enable it. Maybe to provide sort of clarity on how such investments are going to be dealt with. And that such investments have a longer term clarity from taxation perspective, from policy perspective. So I think last thing, what I believe as industry group, as industry stakeholders who all of us care about decarbonization and particularly hard to abate sectors, if government can, and that's a request, Rajnath ji, actually to you, if through your offices we can seek enabling frameworks for investments, not just by people who emit carbon, but also by investors who want to help such corporates. And I would say Renew is in that bucket, but I'm sure there are many more investors wanting to invest in that bucket. How do you create frameworks, enabling frameworks for large scale investments in forestry, agroforestry, in even moving people to efficiency and renewable energy at individual level, grassroots level, and also technology-based investments like carbon sequestration, carbon storage, and reuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. I think very pertinent point you have raised. We have commissioned a study report for carbon capture and utilization and storage, so that we are going to launch very soon. And a task force has been created under Dr. V.K. Saraswat, member Energy. And this is an interministerial group. They will be working towards the policy options for implementation of CCUS in India. So that's the one message I just wanted to provide. But I would like to more hear from you, Deepak, on the carbon market. So maybe not right now, but sometime. Let me turn to the last speaker of this session, Mr. Srini Vishwanathan, CEO, Vibrant Energy.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here with such a august gathering. I represent as CEO as Vibrant Energy. Our DNA of our organization has been to empower corporates to pivot to clean energy fuels right since 6 years ago, and that's all we have done, is to help and corporates through off-site renewables. Today we are backed by one of the world's largest infrastructure manager, Macquarie Green Investment Group. So we have been able to invest significant capital to support corporates on this mission. Especially today's session is so pertinent because all of us deep in our hearts believe in climate change. We need to do something about it. And if we can add value to the hard to abate sector, we've really scored a huge win in this fight against climate change. And Neha madam gave us gave me fantastic insights of what are the challenges both from a manufacturing standpoint that could that the industry will be facing as they transition to this new reality. The way we think about it is there are three strategies we could look at. First, obviously, a lot of the people in the panel have talked about is choose renewable energy to kind of immediately offset your electricity consumption. Here, I'd like to share a little bit insight in terms of just to add, we have seen that we can efficiently do a mix of wind and solar and be able to deliver CUF of close to 55-60%, which is probably better than some of the thermal plants in the country. So, and additionally, a lot of skeptics who always have said that renewable energy is intermittent, it's not really going to solve India's problem. I think there is enough proof in the projects today being with a combination of wind and solar done in a smart optimization manner can give 55% plus CUF. Now, the new trend now is to add storage. There is significant investment that's already coming into the sector in terms of pump storage. We are seeing that with that kind of innovation, obviously the battery storage, the lithium ion is still a few years away to reach the price point that we would like to have. But with pump storage and a combination of wind, solar, and some of the fantastic policies being announced on the ISTS, we are seeing that there is potential to deliver 75% to 85% green energy footprint for this hard-to-abate sector. And that is a phenomenal win when we think about it. Now, the key is to make sure that as renewable energy developers, we are able to come together and deliver that kind of scale in such a short time based on the massive targets that the clients here have taken on their own. Now, the second thing is around sustainable fuels. Obviously, there are the inherent challenges. There are some businesses, some industries that can immediately pivot to green hydrogen. They can move to green ammonia. Now there is also discussion on green methanol. And these are all different combinations that can be, permutation combination can be worked on, but the raw material still remains wind and solar. So as long as you are not able to provide the cheapest green energy, you're not going to be able to give them the advantage of being able to compete with sustainable fuels. And that is the second challenge. Again, it's something both parties will have to work. We, as industry, will have to work through to come to best technology at the most competitive tariff. And these hard industries like cement, concrete, steel, aluminum will have to figure out processes, new technologies that can be able to adopt these technologies like green energy, green ammonia, and green methanol to kind of move forward. We are also already seeing a huge amount of development in terms of sustainable aviation fuels. So we were recently presenting at the World Economic Forum. There is a group called the Mission Possible, which basically is a group of all the top emitters, hard-to-abate emitters across the world who have taken a commitment to be net zero. And some of the writing on the wall is within the next 10 years, aviation fuel, 50 to 60% of aviation fuels are going to be sustainable fuels. And we recently saw Maersk making an order for 6 ships based on green methanol. So these are all signals that the world is moving really fast, and we have all the talent and the will to chase that. And then the last thing that I'll talk about, and some of our colleagues have talked about, it's obviously we want to be net zero and we want to try to be as green as possible. There will always be a gap in terms of trying to, because each of these businesses are growing at phenomenal CAGRs, and it will always be a catch-up in terms of trying to help them hit net zero. And here the angle of being able to bring additionality into the market. So these industries can come in and say, I'm ready to buy a million tons of carbon offsets, million renewable energy certificates. And these commitments that these industries can make to meet their balance 10-15% can actually create that additionality in the market. So developers like us who are building a few gigawatts of projects on ISTS can work out a scenario that while we are giving round-the-clock power through our wind, solar, pump storage, any other combination, we can also create additionality and maybe sell brown power separately and sell the green attributes to these clients to help meet their net zero commitment. So I think these three strategies is where we see as the writing on the wall in terms of the immediate strategy that these companies, the hard-to-abate sectors, can deploy immediately to be able to start getting on the journey of net zero. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Srini. Very fantastic point. Still we have 10 minutes left. So now I'll turn to audience for question answer session. Please identify yourself and you can put your question, please.
Jai Hind all. First of all, it was really, really informative and we could hear from every industry. I'm squadron leader Anuradha and I come from Pune representing All India Renewable Energy Association. So first, when we talk about transitioning towards green economy, we cannot ignore e-mobility for sure. So related to that, we have seen that in a vehicle, if we see it's a bed of all lithium batteries. We see that the life of lithium batteries ranging from 5 to 8 years, 10 years, something like that. But we have not thought about that what will happen to these battery beds once it gets replaced. So there are many points, many things under R&D or discussion at this stage. So the first question what I have here is, we have recently seen that IIT boys almost 2 years back, they worked on aluminum kind of bars as a fuel for e-mobility. So the first question for Mr. Mitesh, I would like to ask that can he visualize or can he suggest that aluminum as a long-term solution, is it worthwhile for e-mobility? Or if there are any challenges with respect to that, then he can highlight. In addition, I also would like to ask Mr. Dinesh that is it what have we any framework in place or something related to recycling of these batteries? Because lithium battery, we have a challenge of cobalt supply. Gradually, we see that there could be shortage of cobalt overall. So do we have some recycling mechanism which is in place or which is going to be in place? One more question comes here from Renew Power, I mean Mr. Deepak Gupta and Mr. Srini, that are we thinking anything about solar panel recycling? Because this is also going to be one of the major challenge what I see, maybe after 20 years or maybe after 10 years, because 10 years old industry at least we have here. So thank you so much.
Let me answer a few of your questions about recycling. In NITI Aayog, we have constituted around 10 groups who are working on the circular economy. And I think the battery recycling and the PV recycling there are two major areas. I think we are already working on. I think reports already on final stage. Some might be under notification. So that would be definitely taken care of. But now I'll turn your question to about the aluminum in the long-term e-mobility.
So I think thanks. I think it's a very pertinent question. And if you look at not only aluminum, we have been also looking zinc as one of the solution. Okay. So the challenge what industry is facing today is the storage density. If you look at compared to lithium battery, the storage density for the aluminum at this point of time is envisaged is very, very low. So it actually makes the basically size of the battery pretty large, and that is actually creating the issue for the mobility industry. Having said that, Hindalco is actually tied up with one of the Israeli company to develop those in India and then work upon. But I'm not sure the challenge is how they're going to work upon this. I personally believe this battery space is really moving very fast and a lot of innovation is taking place. I think Reliance is tied up for the sodium ion battery, and if that works out well, then the entire whatever this, the material security what we are talking about, that issue will get out of it because sodium is abundantly available, okay? But again, the challenge with them is also about the density part of it. Having said that, I think there is a possibility, and I'm sure people are working upon this, how to, recycle the lithium ion and batteries part of it. It's all about the supply chain issues, and all the countries are gearing upon how to, basically develop this recyclability and secure the source. But everybody is working us, including us, on the density part of it. We have also tied up with some of the research agencies to actually work upon that. Not only on the aluminum, but also we are looking very closely zinc, how we actually work upon. And I do agree with you, this metal, whether it's nickel, cobalt, lithium, they are all the metal of future. And till we are able to crack something like sodium battery, I think they will still have a prominence in the world to come. Thank you.
There were hand raised. Yeah.
Just adding to your point, see the battery technology, the way it's expanding and developing across, so we are going towards lithium-free battery technology, because a lot of works are going on there. In fact, there are technologies which are already in work. There is nickel-free, cobalt-free. You talked about cobalt, Congo, Source, Limited, all those areas. There are cobalt-free batteries right now. There are nickel-free batteries, lithium phosphate. You do away with certain elements. In fact, in a battery, there are 5-6 critical elements. We're trying to work on those areas. We can do away with certain critical elements. You talked about aluminum air batteries, zinc air battery. You talked about energy density in those areas. Yes, zinc air battery can be probably used for storage application, not for mobility. It's probably that area we can give to zinc air batteries. And vanadium flow batteries, sodium batteries. So a lot of things are happening in this battery front. It is emerging. As regards recycling, there are 3-4 very big players globally across who are doing this recycling of lithium-ion batteries. In India, there are few players, like we are working with few of the IITs, a few startups are there who are working in this front. They're doing the metal mining, they're recovering those critical elements. So a lot of work is going on in this front. So rest assured, things are happening in this area.
There's one hand raised, gentleman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dr. Sen Gupta. I was Member Secretary of Central Pollution Control Board, Ministry of Environment and Forest. Very good presentation. I want to ask one question to my friend, Dr. Reddy. It is very good that Ultratech is doing a lot on the co-processing of waste in cement plants. Your TSR rate is very good, but to waste, which is plenty available in our country. For example, the biomass and agriculture residue, we have 500 million tons available, and government under the Swachh Bharat Mission 2 are going to spend a lot of money on the baling, transportation of this biomass, and it has a good calorific value. Whether any intention of Ultratech cement to use this biomass as a partial fuel to take care of that CO2 greenhouse gas emission reduction. This is number one. Number two is the solid waste, the municipal solid waste. We have 4,000 legacy sites in our country, where 1 crore ton of municipal solid waste are locked up, and government again, Swachh Bharat Mission is spending about 2 lakh crore on that to make at least 20 to 30% of this waste as RDF. And RDF can be used as a fuel in cement plant. Whether Ultratech has any plan, as the largest cement plant in our country, to use this two waste to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, overall gas emission from there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. To answer to your first question, biomass, already we are using in most of our plants wherever economically available, number one. And some of the states, as we are talking about policy decisions, some states even doesn't allow cement plants to go for biomass. Like I'll take Chhattisgarh. They want to get use in only thermal power plant, not for cement plants. So we are plenty, wherever available, we are using huge quantity of biomass as on date. Number two, legacy waste and MSW, which you're talking about, we are associated with 6 states as on date for legacy waste. The issue is only segregation and properly doing that waste is, because end of the day, we are manufacturing cement, they're asked us to do there and get things to do and take to our plant has become very difficult. So some of the even Vijayawada, we are working on those legacy waste. In Punjab, we are working on that. And some of the even Bihar, they're asking us, one of the transportation. As I was mentioning, industries are assured to only 6 states. Legacy waste, processing there and getting to the sites has become very costly affair. End of the day, it should be economically viable projects. Even some of the legacy waste in Andhra, already we have started using it, because they want to come up with thermal power plants. As you are aware, earlier Andhra, They proposed 9 captive thermal power plants based on the MSW, but they could not materialize. End of the day, I've asked us to do it in 2 plants. We are using legacy waste as well as MSW. And happily share with you, as on date, we have more than 150 agreements with the municipal corporations, where we are teaching those people, we are trying to go to their sites and mobilize those waste, how to segregate it. The issue is only moisture. When I get at my site, we are getting around 20% moisture. So once again, yesterday I had a discussion with ministry also. There are various countries, they want to give around 4,000 CV MSW waste at India at the zero cost. If we can allow those people where we can further use those things, because even with that, India can also get up how people are doing from abroad and sending to us, how we cannot get prepared ourselves. So we are working towards both things, sir. Even our Grasim South plant, as you are aware, almost 20% of fuel replacement is only with MSW. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The gentleman from the first, then after that.
Hi, this is Rahul Raj from HPCL Mit Energy. My question is from Mr. Rajnath and Mr. Mukesh. So one step towards transition toward green economy is use of green hydrogen refineries. But definitely, if you use green hydrogen, the cost goes off producing the fuel. And another step which we are taking is towards use of ethanol. So how do you think these 2 steps will impact the economics of fuel price going forward? Because definitely it will be more costlier for the refineries to produce fuel, and one end you have got, if you blend ethanol, you will have some economics. So how will these 2 steps affect the economy of fuel prices going forward?
You want to answer?
Thank you for your question. I think if you see the economics with respect to of course, definitely the investment requirement for such initiatives is huge, but we have calculated the economics impact that what is the impact on the fuel price, MS and diesel, of if we replace our gray hydrogen to green hydrogen, the impact is around 20 to 30 pesos on MS and diesel. So it's not much at current stage, but once in the future, once we replace all our hydrogen and blend ethanol fully, then the impact will be much higher. So that's we have to go in phase-wise manner. At present, we do not see any major impact for next 10 years if we blend 5 or 10% or 20% and up to 30%. So that's from my side.
This is a question of basically the size and scale. Once you increase the scale, your cost goes down. So now, yeah, next gentleman, yeah, your question, please.
Yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity. Myself, R.K. Das from Universal Strategies and Development Programs. So this is about carbon. Now, at present, we are concerned about how to separate carbon, how to create storage for carbon, even how to create carbon sink. At present, is there any vision, or is it viable ever, how to convert carbon into energy? There are possibilities it can be converted into chemicals, into again fuels also. So it is better to neutralize it, the demon, than to cage it and leave it alive. Please.
Any thoughts? So let me answer your question now. The carbon capture and utilization storage. Whole concept we are pursuing to, rather than go for sequestration, storage, go for utilization. Because I think the whole idea is to decarbonize the sector. Even if you are going for the sequestration or the storage, you are not going to be fully decarbonized, because still some part of your CO2 will be still left in the atmosphere. So, although, globally, there's no foolproof concept as of now, and there are various pilot level, I think the plants have been running, but I don't know if any commercial use cases is there across the world. Even in the US also, they tried to store it and transport it through the pipeline and give it to some oil and gas industries for their hydrocarbon recovery. But I don't know how far this. But the whole concept now we are going for utilization, focusing more towards the utilization rather than the storage.
Sir, in fact, adding to what you have just now mentioned, this carbon capture, storage and utilization. So right now, CC as rightly told, is being done across. In fact, there are globally 30 to 35 CCAs plant, which working commercially. As regard utilization issue is there, apart from sequestration, utilization is also for enhanced oil recovery wherever it is possible of that carbon, captured carbon. Otherwise, conversion into methanol, which 2-3 commercial process technologies are already proven, which is being used. And certain industries like fertilizer plants are using CO2 for manufactured ammonia. So there also it can be used, those captured carbon. So some of the areas it can be done. It's happening, but very few areas.
And I mean, obviously there are some very innovative, but at a very small scale. There is at least one unit I'm aware of converting carbon to diamond. I mean, but none of these processes that we are all talking about are energy negative. These are all processes which require more energy to convert carbon into any of the reusable forms. But yes, a lot of development is happening in this space.
This isn't going very interesting, but just last question from, yes, gentlemen. Yeah.
Good morning, this is Pradeep from Professor of Energy from NTPC School of Business. I'm from a different domain. This is an August gathering of industry, regulators and others. I have got one appeal and one question. First, let me tell my appeal. As an school, business school on energy management, we disseminate the knowledge and we conduct research in the secondary area. Now, while we're conducting the research in the secondary area, which requires data from the industry, one of the area which is going in our country is possibilities of blending of hydrogen with, natural gas and all these things. And there are many small pilot projects which has been done either by ONGC or IOC or somebody else. When we are going for conducting the secondary research and trying to collect the data, it's unfortunate that we are not able to really get the data from the industry. It's very difficult. And in our country, which is basically a Shruti, we have totally memorized the Ved, the dissemination of knowledge is not very there. Can we request Niti Aayog in this aspect and the August gathering, we can make a dissemination platform where all the small pilot projects which are going, some data, which are not very sacrosanct data, can be shared with us and we can conduct research. This is one appeal. And my question is only one. Madam Mili has talked about whether do we have the habit of switching off the light, fan and all these things. One major issue which is going for, I think, last more than 10 and 12 years is the demand side management. We all look about the supply side management in our country, but perhaps we are not thinking about the demand side management. Can we have the policy and all these things on demand side management, which will make ourselves an energy efficient? Thank you, sir.
Very important points you have raised. But the lifestyle for environment, it talks about all these things, the demand side aspect, where I think changing the people perceptions, how can be a better human by conserving the energy, switching off light, maybe instead of using individual personal car, using the mass rapid transport system, all those kind of stuff. And lifestyle for environment, that's the whole concept behind the life which was announced by Honorable Prime Minister. I think that's the one major steps. I think changing perception about the human being, how we can be a responsible consumer for the energy. So that's one aspect. Now coming back to the energy data part. Niti Aayog is working to, we already have the India Energy Dashboard. I think whatever data is being collected publicly by the respective ministry, we are collecting that data and putting at one place. That's one aspect. And we are also coming out the third version of dashboard, where the all data, even the demand side data, but this is all supply side. The demand side data is also missing, and where a lot of service is required and collecting data from the different industries, and a regular and a timely survey, because mostly as of now, they do the household consumption survey, and the frequency of those data is very, very, it sometimes come on time, sometimes it's very late. So the frequency of defining those data is also critical. So thank you very much. Given the time constraints, I would like to conclude this session and ask Ankit if you can say any final words.
While we thank the speakers for their exemplary contribution, we'll have a good photograph. Yeah. You can stand. That was a superb discussion. Chalo. Now, we will start the next session within 5 minutes. Request delegates to remain seated. Ms. Manvi Ahuja, Mr. Raghav Handa, Mr. Aditya Sakuja. Over to Mr. Ankit Hosing.
A very good morning again to all of you. We'll start the session on investment and financing for energy transition. Since yesterday, we have had a series of sessions where we have spoken about various initiatives and measures to proceed with the transition journey that we've already embarked upon. Yesterday, we spoke about new technologies emerging across energy generation, carbon capture, as well as enabling infrastructure to be able to support the transition drive. We also spoke about electric mobility, which is again going to be a significant driver to our carbon footprint reduction targets. And today, just before this, we had a session on hard to abate sectors. Now, the various initiatives that are being spoken about also require a significant amount of investment into making this a reality. And I think this session is exactly what we need to sort of go deeper into it and understand how some of this investment can come in. Another point that's important is that at least at this stage, several of these initiatives are not really commercially viable or value accretive from that perspective. So how do we make sure that all of us, including our friends on the dais who represent organizations from a financing perspective, look at some of these initiatives and possibly identify measures that can help us fund some of these initiatives as well. So I will start with Mr. Raghav Handa from HSBC, and would like to hear about his perspective on how HSBC is looking at investments or financing of initiatives towards energy transition.
Thank you so much, Ankit, and a very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I think before we step into what HSBC is doing in this space, I think it's important to understand that why is financing so critical for this sector, right? And we've done some study which has been submitted to, and thankfully it's been heard well. It's probably, it's gone to the PMO, it's gone to the Ministry of Finance, it's gone to the consumer line ministries, etc. I think it's very important to understand that it's, for India to meet its NDC targets, right? There is a total financing, and you would have heard about this, you would have read about this. the total financing that's required is close to about $170 billion, right, between now and 2030. We are almost 3 years into this decade, which just keeps us with probably another 7 years. And this is for India to achieve its 500 gigawatts of renewable target. And even if we consider the, pretty much the revised target, which is at about 430, 440, we would still need about $170 billion of finance per year. The total credit inflow into the market over the last 3 years, right? So banks may stand up and say that we are funding for sustainability, etc. Fair enough. But then if you take an actual look of actual kind of look at the numbers, the average credit inflow in the market over the last 3 years has been at $18.3 billion. With some spikes in a year going up to maybe, probably like 1 year would have had some $20 billion, another would have had some $17 billion, but then the average is 18.3. So if you see the difference that India needs 170 and the total credit inflow by all banks in India put together is at only $18.3 billion. So this is a very starking difference, and this is not a gap that can just be covered by a few financial sector participants kind of stepping up their participation. So I think it's very critical to understand this in the backdrop of why is sustainable finance so critical. There are obviously steps that are being taken by the government, which are absolutely great. It's actually very encouraging to note that there is a strong diversification in terms to bring about a decarbonization. So moving from traditional sectors such as onshore wind, hydel, etc., to now there's obviously a massive focus on electric vehicles, the overall ecosystem. When I say overall ecosystem, it goes right up to the level of ensuring that there is financing provided for grid upgrades as well, because if you do not have a stable grid supply, you will not be able to set up efficient charging stations, be it for commercial vehicles or be it for e-buses, and pretty much the overall ecosystem on the battery side of it as well. And then going into some newer technology segments such as green hydrogen, offshore wind, like biopellets, etc. There have been suggestions, there have been some various discussions that we've had with the government, and this has been with a very strong group of industry representations as well. We also have Mr. Vivek sitting here from John Cockrell. When there's support that's coming in from, when there's support that's coming in from the industry, I think it becomes all the more critical, right? The other piece that is probably very, very important to understand is that, given these newer technologies, there is obviously a fair degree of technology risk. And given the nascency of these sectors, prima facie, if a project comes to a bank, say on financing a green hydrogen manufacturing unit, the prima facie view may be that this is not feasible, right? Now, if we were to look at all these newer sectors with the traditional banking lens or a traditional credit lens, these projects really may not ever, take off, right? And hence, some of the steps that we do believe should kind of enable credit to some of these sectors is on blended finance, and we have Surbi as well from World Bank, and there are programs that we are working with them and under MLIs and DFIs as well. Blended finance, be it in terms of co-funding, be it in terms of guarantee support, etc., ensures that projects are given wings early in the day. Because these are long-term projects, right? These are not just 1 or 2 or 3 year projects. These are long-term, gestated projects. And secondly, there is an important need, and you would have heard about a lot of advocacy these days of giving priority sector lending status to sustainable finance projects. The current limit that has been allowed by the banking regulator is only some 30 crores, which is not even chicken feed to maybe a startup, right? So you cannot think that a 30 crore support is good enough to support any sustainable projects. So we've advocated the recent paper that came out from an RBI climate finance paper where RBI was seeking inputs. We've kind of requested this limit to be increased to 500 crores per borrower and per project, and include everything that is green, specifically the newer areas including EVs, green hydrogen, offshore wind and biopellets. Now very briefly coming to HSBC's view on this, and if I can just take another minute, Ankit. So globally, we've kind of committed about 170, between $750 billion to $1 trillion of sustainable finance, out of which $170 billion globally have already been deployed. In India, we are roughly about a $27 billion balance sheet, and 14% of this balance sheet is already green. right? Which means we've issued green loans, we've issued sustainability linked loans, and the important part is that this is not only to anchor corporates, but to their entire supply chain. So if I was to bring in efficiency to an anchor corporate and help the anchor corporate to go, to get to a net zero charge, I cannot do that without greening the supply chain. And this supply chain is largely comprised of MSMEs, SMEs, and startups, for whom credit may not really be the most easiest thing to kind of access. And hence, under our sustainability linked program, that comes with a margin benefit ranging anywhere between 30 basis points to 80 basis points as compared to the normal rates of credit in the market. There is a very conscious effort to support startups, MSMEs, and SMEs who are a part of the the overall global value chain for that particular anchor corporate. Our exposures currently have been in the traditional sectors, but we are absolutely open. I mean, we do have some programs, in fact, a couple of transactions going on with, World Bank itself on, like EV financing, pretty much open to exploring on green hydrogen, manufacturing of electrolyzers, manufacturing of hydrogen itself, offshore wind, so on and so forth. The second point that I would probably just mention, and I'll probably just conclude after that, there is a conscious effort of working with the regulators to try and shape the local policy agenda, which is obviously going to be possible when there is a bottom-up industry feedback that we try and amplify. You may not, you essentially don't need an HSBC to go to the government, but where we kind of do bring in is really the amplification effect. And the third is in fact just some sideline chats on how do we support issuance of bank guarantees and others. So these are very, very simple products. If you are an average tenor across all banks in India would be between 5 to 7 years. If you do need longer tenor, like project supports, it's, like typically through a green bond issuance or maybe a sustainability bond issuance. And we've, just to maybe like conclude, and I'll probably just stop after that, out of a total $6.81 billion of green and sustainability linked bonds that got issued last year, as per the CFLI report. For the ones who don't know what CFLI is, this is the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative, the Michael Bloomberg Initiative. As HSBC in India, we've issued about 5.61 out of 6.81. And this is specifically to kind of address, like longer tenor, like requirements, which may not really be possible only through a plain bank finance. I'll maybe just stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Raghav. Really encouraging to, hear about the efforts that HSBC is putting in to enhance the access to finance, especially for areas where it may be difficult at this stage, given the questionable viability of some of these projects. I would like to move to Aditya now and sort of get a perspective on the challenges that we are seeing in the market from a financing perspective, so that then we can sort of pose those questions to the other members here on the dais.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. At the outset, I think if I have to summarize it in one line, cheap energy is the bedrock of modern economy. And for us to deliver cheap energy, we need cheap financing. So that's where all of this is coming from. The challenges that we are facing while raising financing, I think let's take a minute to understand what's happening globally, right? The first thing that we are observing is massive inflation, thanks to like post-COVID recovery. And what that is leading to, the central banks raising interest rates across the globe. Some of them are acting faster than the others. And naturally, like because of interest rate parity, you'll see the foreign exchange markets like plummeting. We did see a depreciation of INR against the US dollar. And then what that tells us is that the FX markets are going to be volatile for a bit. Having said that, what it means is that at this moment, like going offshore for raising financing, it's probably something to wait and watch out for. We did see one of our formidable competitors refinance its bonds in INR, like they had bonds earlier, US dollar-based bonds, and now they refinanced it. So of course, like from today's standpoint, I think foreign lending, because of the hedging cost, do not look palatable at this moment. So that's like a challenge that we face. Second, like when we talk about offshore lending as well, like the market for masala bonds, that is INR-denominated bonds, it's not too mature. I mean, we've only seen like one recent issuance by AM Energy. We do think that there's potential to grow there, but again, that kind of hinges on the point of like FX volatility. Moving to, like, but having said all of this, we do have engaged in the past with one of the Swiss impact funds, fully hedged for a period of 3 years. So but it does require a lot of structuring around it, unique ways to structure the security package. But there are ways to navigate it, but again, like it requires a collaborative effort of everybody to come together there. Moving to the domestic side, what we have seen is like broadly, like the NBFCs have like, no wonder like they're taking over the renewables market, like their execution speed is just commendable. We just like concluded like 2 debt transactions recently of about around about 400, 450 crores. And then the transaction speed at the speed with which we got the sanction and then with which we executed the facility agreement was just fantastic. So NBFCs, again, like it's fantastic that the speed at which they operate. So we do like engaging with it. Traditional banks, what we have seen is that they've been typically, like traditionally, a little bit slow, and they have more requirements when it comes to, say, corporate guarantees, which we are traditionally averse to. And those are traditionally non-recourse. They are not non-recourse financing, which kind of poses a challenge from a project finance standpoint. And then, like, finally on the domestic bond market, like again, like we are seeing that the Indian government is planning to raise about $2 billion in green bonds this year. And what that will do is that will reduce the cost of debt, fortunately. But again, like domestic bond markets are still, I would say, very shallow. And it's all like 98% of the bonds in India are all through private placements, right? So like the SEBI is working towards making that more liquid. But again, like in spite of all of this, like the industry looks better than ever. We do operate exclusively in the corporate renewable space. And we are seeing affinity of banks to just provide solutions to us. So I think that's been, that's my 2 cents in there.
So we heard about a few of the challenges that we face with respect to financing, especially with the forex fluctuations at this moment. I mean, where we have been depreciating significantly against the dollar, though there are a few other currencies that can possibly be looked at from that perspective. I'll request Rahul to sort of shed some more light on how SBI Capital is looking at some of these options.
Yes, thank you, Ankit. So what I can say on behalf of SBI or on behalf of SBI Caps, that we are a commercial bank. So whenever we talk about any transaction, we look at how that particular transaction has been structured, how the contracts have been structured, whether that makes a viable solution or not at that point in time. And historically, we know that at 10 years, 12 years before, when the solar sector started, the size was very small. The last project, the first project that SBI did, that was of 15 megawatt. And that was at the project cost of 25 crore rupees. And SBI, 25 crore rupees per megawatt, so 300 crore rupees for that. But SBI took that chance, participated in the facility, and learned the technical know-how, how to do that particular kind of project, and also acted as a bellwether in terms of other banks for doing the funding. So right now, from last 10 years or 15 years, we have seen that SBI or SBI Caps is participating a lot in renewable energy sector, and we are, as a bank, providing the facilities to various kind of borrowers. And right now, when we talk about 2022, we are talking about 1,500 megawatt projects, which SBI is funding and underwriting it, where it's providing the one-stop solution to the borrowers. And it's coming up with the new kind of facilities also, where the LCs, BGs would be given to the borrower at a very competitive price, which can be further utilized for arranging the cheap finance to the borrower. That also reduces the cost of funding for the borrower. So lots of work is happening. But the only issue with SBI, because that does not qualify under the PLI or PSL that is stipulated by RBI, so there should be some steps from the government side that is required to make those particular amendments in the regulations. At the same time, government should ensure that the projects which are coming are viable in terms of doing the funding. Historically also, banks have supported many industries like textile industry, we have supported through TUFs in terms of doing that execution. We have helped many borrowers in terms of getting the business ramped up. And the tenor also earlier, I think when we talk about 10 years, 15 years back, the tenor of the project loan was 10 years to 15 years. Now, because these projects are of long period, the tenor also SBI is okay with the 20 years, 22 years, which is a long dated tenor. Comparatively, those tenors are not available when we talk about the ECB or Masala kind of guidelines, so that we can support the industry.
Yeah, a very pertinent point on misalignment between project life and the loan tenor, which we all in the industry have been facing for long. And while there are mechanisms such as bond, which have already been mentioned, which are sort of used to enhance the loan tenor, but some of the newer mechanisms that you're talking about will obviously be very helpful for the industry. Let me move to Surabhi Goyal from World Bank now. And while we spoke about viability of financing projects, where especially now when we talk about the conventional renewable projects, there is typically not as big a challenge in financing them. But when you talk about newer initiatives, the sort of projects which have not really been done before, which are pioneering the energy transition journey, and as I mentioned earlier, some of them may not really be clearly commercially viable, but would require concessional financing or support in that direction. Would like to hear more from you on how World Bank or World Bank Group is looking at it.
Sure, thank you. So we exactly do what you just mentioned, before HSBC, SBI caps, and anyone can enter the market. This is what we enter into. So we generally take the first mover risk of the technologies, of launching the newer instruments, and demonstrating to the market that how these technologies can work, how these financing instruments can leverage the private markets. So what we generally do is that we get very much into the segment upstream, backed by a lot of analytical work across the technologies. For instance, if I talk about green hydrogen, which is like hot cake, and every conference discusses about it. So in green hydrogen, even before we go back to the government, internally we are doing a lot of work on which segments should India look at, what are the various barriers in the supply chain, what should be done to plug those barriers, what are the mitigation measures that the private sector should look at, the government should look at, the regulators should look at. And then we are also working to, for instance, map the various hydrogen hubs, to understand that which are those first movers which can demonstrate potentially the technology with the lesser amount of risks. Because our thought process is that the first demonstration projects should be as simple as possible with lower risks in terms of externalities. So given all these kind of various interventions, we focus on the policy regulatory mechanisms in parallel and tap into the concessional financing from climate investment funds, from JEF, et cetera, so that overall the financing cost comes down and the commercial value can be established for these newer technologies. Now, the objective is that, our colleague from HSBC was mentioning, that the financing requirement is huge. It's not that only one of us or even all of us here sitting can support this huge financing need. So our basic principle is that where should World Bank enter into, which can demonstrate that these technologies are at the commercial cusp and can be taken forward for the commercial investments to come in. And with that objective, we try to find a comparative advantage where the public sector has, in terms of leveraging the financing which is available in the market. So I'll just take a quick example on how the solar parks scheme of Government of India was supported by the bank. So I'm sure some of you would have heard about Riva Solar Park, which brought down the tariffs of the solar, drastically, and had set the point for solar to go further, lower from that point onwards. So that was like one of the good examples where we talk about the blended financing, not directly blended by the bank, of course, but how we leverage the public investments to attract more commercial investments. And that really set the stage, because after that, the guidelines for tariff-based bidding for solar was introduced. A lot of other interventions were introduced. A lot of things that were in gray were put in black and white. And I think this is what the industry needs. Similarly, on floating solar, we are going to come up with a report in a month or 2 months' time, where we are bringing a technical standard and certifications compendium specifically for India. So how we can leverage these technologies and reduce the risks which are attached to it. So our role is beyond financing. Financing is just a tool to get a hook into the system, but to help the sector manage the issues beyond financing. So.
No, appreciate that, and especially, I had an opportunity of working with Surbhi and team in one of such new mechanisms, which can possibly be a breakthrough for the sector. So while we've had discussions around how we're looking at financing, largely from a debt perspective so far, I think it's the right time to bring in Manavi now to talk about the philosophy that organizations such as yours have when we talk about sort of investment and not just the financing part of things.
Sure, and for the benefit of the group, I come from CPPIB, which is the Canadian Pension Plan, and more looking at equity financing beyond debt financing. But I would say a lot of points that Surbhi mentioned are something that it echoes with us as well, because in our mind, all three need to work very well together for us to look at an investment, whether it's at a project level or at a company level. First, of course, being just a general education around the sector. I think we're all learning globally about a lot of these new technologies. The answers are not available to anyone today. So it's an evolving space. Every day we learn about what a certain country is doing, whether we can use the same learnings in a different company, a different portfolio company across the world. And that is a journey that we all have to undertake. And during that period, I think two important things from our perspective would always be policy support as well as the risk-return trade-off. I mean, it's competitive financing is one angle, but at the same time, since nobody knows the answers, there is risk associated with these sectors. So the risk-return trade-off should be good for people to make that kind of assessment on these sectors and then take the plunge. And to bridge that gap around what risk one can take and what's the risk one cannot take, I think policy and regulatory support is also very, very key in this sector. Because it's not typically in the form only of subsidies, but in the way that you can transition the sector into making it more palatable for whether debt or equity investments to take that plunge. I think that regulatory support can come in a lot of ways. And I think like Surbhi also mentioned, that also requires, and even the regulators are learning, even the government is learning along with us. So what it really requires is working with them hand in hand to say that this has been working for us globally, these are our learnings, and at the same time see what can you do for India, which is probably in line or different from what you've seen in other geographies. So in my mind, it's a different pool of capital, but at the journey we are in, I don't see it very different from how the debt and the financing peers of mine are approaching it.
Let's sort of switch gears now and maybe get into a few more specific issues. Aditya was earlier talking about issues with corporate guarantees, and therefore how should we look at off-balance sheet financing. I'll maybe pick Raghav's brains on how HSBC has been looking at that, especially the challenge that we've seen is how you ring fence a particular investment, and therefore how do you make sure that the risks or the interests of the lenders or the financiers are secured. So your thoughts on that, Raghav, how are you looking at it?
See, I think probably a very case-specific issue, right? We've had clients we've had a multitude of clients who've not been willing to give, who've not been very comfortable in blocking cash margins and giving cash collateral, and hence, a corporate guarantee, probably is something that's really been forthcoming, but completely appreciate that in certain cases, this really may not be the preferred form of security. just kind of relating this to off-balance sheet financing, right? So what we've been doing, and we've had a couple of successful cases, and hence this piece of conviction when I say this, they have been, and they have to be like different structures for different cases, but then there have been cases where, let's say if there's a very strong sponsor support, which means through an anchor corporate who's giving you, and where I mean to say that there's confirmed offtake, and the offtaker is of really supreme credit in the market, right? We would use that. We would kind of take a comfort on that particular offtake and the existing credit that we would have with that, credit appetite with that anchor unit, even if it's a verbal support. So if it's, for example, a high profile group in India, would not want to take any single name, but there have been cases where we've just acted on verbal support, right? And that verbal support comes in from someone senior in the organization to someone extremely senior in the bank, and we've kind of gone ahead. Now, like similarly, when it comes to supporting the supply chain, or probably in Aditya's case, there are the bank guarantees that they need to issue are to basically corporates, and those are private corporates, and for which banks have been insisting on giving a corporate guarantee. Now, my sideline discussion with him was that there could be a structure that we could probably look at where the counterparty that you have, with which you are signing, the PPA with, if that's an existing credit in the market and that's a clean credit in the market, it could actually be an off-balance sheet financing where we may not insist on a corporate guarantee, but there has to be some form of, securitization that needs to come in, which could either be a personal guarantee by the promoter, it could be some sort of a cash margin, may not be 100%, but maybe a specific percentage that we need to kind of cover a risk. I'll find it very rare if there's a financial institution in the, in the country who will do a clean credit, specifically in newer technologies, specifically in cases where there are longer tenors involved. But then again, there could be specific structuring that could really be bought in. Another point that I just want to, build in, Ankit, with your permission here, is that as of now, India suffers because of a lack of a green taxonomy. Now, the reason that I say this, because it's pretty much left to independent banks of how do they classify what projects are green or not. Green project identification, at least I can talk from an HSBC perspective. Green projects or sustainable projects, it's not only green, when you kind of talk about sustainable projects, it's really with a wider ESG lens. They definitely come in with a margin benefit. And that margin benefit is not just a few basis points here and there. That margin benefit is substantial. It ranges from 40 basis points to almost 80 basis points of difference. When I say a margin benefit, that is the way of concessional finance that we try and bring in. So there's been a lot of work that obviously the banking regulator has been doing. They've been working very hard with various banks, with various industries, of trying to see of how to develop a taxonomy. Once that a taxonomy is in place, I guess it just gives a very templated approach to all banks in the country to really have an identifier of what's green and what's not green. So like today, something could be green for me, but something may not be green for another bank. So if a borrower has got a multiple banking arrangement, then why should a borrower suffer just at the cost of the other bank not kind of identifying it as green? So I think it's important for there to be a green, taxonomy. And hopefully, I think we should have something very soon. As of now, banks are following an arbitrary approach, and I think I can speak with a broad concessional view here, which is to follow the European taxonomy. There have been various efforts to how to replicate inputs that have come in from the Singapore taxonomy, which is by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, by the European taxonomy, where I think EIB, which is the European Investment Bank, has played a very pivotal role in setting up that taxonomy. So the limited point is that once we have a taxonomy, it will help the right identification of projects, and hence for those specific set of projects, probably a concessional finance coming both to the anchor unit, as well as to its entire supply chain.
Completely, agree on the point of taxonomy, and we've been making multiple representations to the authorities to sort of expedite this. And what we need is a more comprehensive framework on how we should look at green in the true sense, especially given that in this journey there will be a lot of innovative projects or initiatives that will be taken. So right, it cannot just be a list; it has to be a framework where you're able to clearly identify if something like this kind of qualifies as green. There were points made around issuance of bonds, and the lack of depth in the bond market that we have in the country. Maybe I'll have Rahul come in and sort of talk about the kind of things that we need to make the bond markets deeper, and any initiatives that the organization is taking around.
So as far as bond market is concerned, again, as Manvi said that we are looking at the risk return. So any investor who is investing in the bond, he'll be analyzing that particular asset from its investment perspective, and then they are looking at the return. So in the bond market specifically, when we talk about the rating of the facility is paramount. If the bond is rated at a particular notch, only then the investor would come in and start investing. And now to get the rating done, you should have the contracts in place. If the contracts are in place, if the risk has been properly mitigated, only then the rating would come. It will be followed by the money from the investors. And again, maybe I may be sounding conservative, but from the commercial bank's point of view, it's very important that we should have the policy initiatives in line to have the competitive financing. Historically, what we have seen in Gujarat, when the first PPA came in, that was at 15 rupees per unit, 2010 when we are talking about. But that PPA was for 15 years, 25 years. So everybody was very well aware that the company would be getting money for next 25 years, and then we can lend that particular company for 15 years or 20 years of duration, because the cash flows are very much visible. But when we talk about the other manufacturing companies, then we are talking about, let's say, wafers. So right now, you put up a particular facility at a X cost, and 5 years down the line or 3 years down the line, the cost of that particular unit goes down, and you again have to compete in the same market. Then the lending, the money that has been provided by the lender would also go for the toss. So it's very important that we should have the strong policy initiative. We should have the clear guidelines in place so that the competitive funding can be arranged.
So just one point to add on bonds, right? As we all know that the international bond markets have not been in the best of shape for the last 1 year. This is certainly, we've had quite a few of our clients coming to us seeking view that if this is indeed the right time to kind of approach international, the international bond markets, except that 1 month window that came in very recently, right? We do our own internal in-house view is that I think by Jan there should be there should be a strong correction in the global bond markets, and hence what we've been advising is that if perhaps we can use the time between now and Jan, because there's extensive documentation that is kind of required for an international bond issuance, and the rating point of it is really of a paramount importance, because that somewhere takes quite a few months as well. So if you are if you're really looking at tapping the international bond market, be it for a sustainability linked bond, or be it for a green bond, or be it for a social bond, or be it for a transition bond, etc. I think probably the right time in our view should be from anywhere starting Jan. Just one point to keep in mind: there is obviously a heavy fees that gets charged whenever you do an international bond issuance. For it to be commensurate, and we are just speaking, and I'm probably just speaking out of experience, the minimum ticket size when you look at tapping the international bond market should be about $300 million plus. However, if you are looking to tap the INR / the onshore bond markets, it can start with a very small ticket size, starting from about $70 million, $50 million, going up to $250 million as well. I think the depth in the bond market onshore is obviously a question, as pointed out by Ankit, and hence investors do prefer to kind of go overseas. But then I guess there are efforts, and I can speak on being privy to some of them, that there are strong efforts to develop those bond markets. In fact, the government is also going, I mean, you all would have heard about GIFT City, right? I mean, with IFSCA as the banking regulator. IFSCA is the first banking regulator or the first regulator in the country that has actually mandated all banks that effective 1st April 23, 5% of their balance sheet needs to be towards green finance. Now, IFSCA is actually kind of coming up with a very interesting product, is basically to develop a platform for price discovery for carbon credit trading. So I have a few startups who've kind of come to me saying that, like India is largely, both a buyer as well as a supplier market, and there are efforts to develop a voluntary, like carbon, really in terms of a voluntary carbon credit trading, platform. So just to kind of put it in context, there could be startups who could be doing a direct air capture, saving, probably saving X amount of, carbon emissions, and then earning, like 1 carbon credit per every ton of carbon emission saved. Now, there have been interesting use cases that have come to us that how do I trade these carbon credits to save on my working capital, to save on the working capital cost from the banks. So to do that tradability, I mean, as of now, carbon credits are only traded. So if a startup has to sell those carbon credits to, say, a Reliance, probably, just putting a name out, probably a name out there. So RIL could be a buyer, and, this guy could be a supplier. But then that's through an OTC market, which is basically a private deal. Where the regulators are also very focused is to bring in a price discovery platform. And I think once that happens, that is also going to be a step towards extending concessional finance specifically for startups, MSMEs, and SMEs in this space. So I just wanted to bring this point out. I just felt it's important. Back to you.
Sure. I'll just pick on a specific point that you mentioned, and which is also relevant for our discussion here, where you spoke about sort of a minimum threshold ticket size when we talk about accessing the bond markets, especially as they exist today.
So by the way, this is not, this minimum threshold is not really defined by the regulator.
I understand it's more from a viability perspective, given the costs involved and so on. But then that makes it very difficult for a lot of initiatives or projects to sort of tap into that particular avenue for financing. And that's where there have been discussions around how do you aggregate smaller projects, bundle them all together, and make sure that they're all able to avail the same beneficial or concessional finance, as you will. So any thoughts on that? And maybe Surabhi or Manavi, you want to take that up?